Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply, and this is the Leather Element. If you've got a good question for us or a good idea for a leather element, drop it in the comment box below. Also, if you want to know when our videos are released, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So how about a Shop Tricks Hand Sewing Part 2? Now, do we need every one of these tricks to hand sew leather? Absolutely not. Do we need a sewing machine? Again, absolutely not. We can put in a beautiful stitch line on our coffee table, our desk in our spare room, or our kitchen table. Now, the biggest points of hand sewing. Well, first off, in my opinion, it's stronger than a machine stitch. But secondly, I love the look of a hand sewn product, but also when we're hand sewing, we have total control where each and every stitch lands. To me, that's the biggest point. So we've got some tricks, some tips here that I hope are going to help us out in our shop. Let's start right here because this is a great question. Can we use machine thread to hand sew leather? Well, yes and no. It's definitely going to sew for us, but the wax thread has got characteristics the machine thread doesn't have or need when we're sewing on a machine. But also, something I've never seen, a good comparison between the sizes of the wax thread and the machine thread. Now, this is by no means scientific, but to me, roughly, the 0.8 millimeter Ritza is roughly equivalent to a 277 machine thread. The 0.6 millimeter Ritza is roughly equivalent to a 207. Now, our Ritza is not spun. That's actually a braid, so it's a little hard to gauge, but for the two most common threads I use in my shop, that's a good comparison. Okay, so let's do a little sewing. Let's go with a piece of our holster leather. This is actually a pre-dyed veg tan. We can stamp it, tool it, wet form it. It's going to take a beautiful top coat. Let's go with a good deep black, and then we'll use a nice bright white stitch line so we can see what's going on. Let's go with a 0.8 Ritza, and I'm just going to do a simple saddler stitch. Let's get a few stitches in. And there we have 4 stitches. As I sew along, when I add tension, I can feel that stitch or that thread sink just a little bit below the top grain. But I can feel it, it's tight. It stays tight as I sew. Okay, next up, let's tie a square knot. Say we want to hide a knot inside a hole or between 2 plies. So right over left, circle around. Left over right, circle around. And then let's draw that down. Good. Okay, I've got a very strong knot there. Gave just a little bit, but that's a good knot. Okay, let's go over to our 277 machine thread. Let's do the same thing. Saddler stitch. And one more. Okay, when I pull tension on my thread, I can actually see that little piece of thread back out a little bit. It's not staying tight. That's one of the benefits of the wax. But let's try tying a knot with our unwaxed thread. So again, same thing. Right over left, circle around. Left over right, circle around, and let's draw that down. We've got it. That is just not a good knot. That is coming out. And in fact, not only is the knot coming out, but it's starting to fray badly. So let's go with our wax thread. We can always wax our machine thread, but this is inexpensive enough. Let's just go with wax thread, and we're going to have no issues sewing. I'm adding this tip because I am notorious about doing this, and if I am, there are others. So I'm going to do my best to help. Here's what I'm talking about. When we're going to hand sew leather, our first step, let's add a groove. Our second step, we're going to chisel. We're going to pre-punch our holes. No matter what weight of leather I'm working with, I always go straight to my 6-tine. This is a mistake. Well, first off, I fully believe that I'm going to move faster. Actually, that's not the case. Well, on a 3 to 4 ounce or a 4 to 5 ounce leather, that 6 tines are going to move through that relatively easy. And when we try to pull that out, it's going to come right out. Well, when we jump up to an 8 to 9 ounce, we've got a lot of steel moving through a lot of leather. The first thing that's going to happen is I'm really going to have to lean into my mallet to try to get all 6 tines through that leather. Well, it's going to be inconsistent. I'm going to tear up my mallet, my poly board. Here's the biggest problem though. All my concentration is on my mallet. So therefore my chisel is going to wag back and forth. So on our backside, we're going to have a squirrely chisel and stitch line. It's going to look terrible. Now, second problem, bigger problem. trying to get this back out of that leather. We're going to have to rock it back and forth. We're going to ream out these holes. We're going to get tired of doing that, and we're going to get irritated. Okay, easy answer to all of this. Let's simply back down to less chisels. Now, I say we move faster. We're going to prove it. So let's do this. On this side, I'm going to go with a 6-tine. We'll time it. On this side, I'll go with a 4-tine. Let's time it. So let's start right here. Start our clock and add a 6-tine. And let's go with one more. And I'm really kind of having trouble trying to get all those tines consistently through our leather. Well, first off, let's do this. Let's stop right there. Exactly a minute to do this piece. But also, I noticed I've reamed out a couple of the holes, and in all honesty, I really did get frustrated trying to work this back out. But also, getting our tine evenly through these holes, that's a little bit of a trick. All right, so we're at a minute. Let's do this. Let's jump over to a 4-tine, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. And the last one. Okay, so let's stop right there. Noticeably faster. Well, 10 seconds. But the bigger point, my stitch line or my chisel line looks so much more consistent. But at the same time, I only have to hit the chisel once, maybe twice, to get those tines through there. Again, it's a simple fact. Less steel going through this leather. Now, one more point. I mentioned something even thicker. Now, typically, I'm going to try not to go through 2 8-to-9s back to back. But once in a while, something like a sheath or a scabbard, we've got to get that together. So we're going to have to do this. Well, how about let's do this? Let's take our 6-tine. Let's drop that in our groove. And let's just mark where we want our holes. Now let's bump back down to a single tine. And that went right through. Let's do one more. Good. So I'm not struggling with the chisel back and forth. I can feel like it's going straight through. But also, usually if we're doing this, we're just going to be sewing a holster or a scabbard. So we don't have a very long stretch of stitching. So all told, it's really not that bad to go one at a time. This is just my opinion, but see if you agree. When we sew with a diamond chisel, we have to sew a little bit differently than we do with a flat chisel. So right here, I've just got 8 or 10 holes done with our 1/8-inch flat chisel. That's my favorite way to go. So with this, a simple saddler stitch, I'm going to start with the first hole, 1 needle, equal out my length. So now, on our second hole, I'm going to go both needles at the same time, make an X and pull those through. And there we are. We've got a good consistent stitch line. Okay, let's switch over to our 5mm diamond chisel. So with this, what I would prefer to do is sew this 1 needle at a time. Well, let's get started at our first hole with our saddler stitch. Good. Now what I'm going to do, second hole, I'm always going to start from my top grain. I'm going to pull my needle through and up. So basically, the second needle is going below and in front of this thread. This is going to give us a very nice zigzag stitch. So let's get a couple of stitches in the same way. And let's do one more. Good. Okay. So we've got that nice zigzag stitch line. That's what I'm looking for. But let's mix it up. How about we do the diamond chisel, both needles at the same time? So I'm going to start just anywhere along my chisel line. Now the first problem I'm having is simply getting both needles through that hole at the same time. The diamond hole is just a little bit smaller. But notice too, my stitches, they're all over the place. Well, in some places I've got a zigzag, but now I'm reversed that. So this is actually going to take, here we are, this is going to take a little bit longer, but it is so worth it. Our last tip is an important one because I see this done all the time on production belts and sometimes on expensive production belts or straps, and it's absolutely wrong. You'll see why. Now with me, I tend to secure my buckles in with rivets or Chicago screws. They're easy, they look good, and they're durable. But if we really want to make a quality belt or strap, we need to sew our buckle in. Well, our first thought here, let's take a chisel, come outside of our oblong, and knock in a chisel line. Okay, well that looks pretty good. Here's the problem. We just reduced the strength of that belt by about 50% and add a buckle in a place that's going to get a lot of wear. That's going to tear out in no time. So how about we do this? Let's just make a small pattern. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in 2.5 inches from the end of my strap. I'm going to drop in my 1.5 inch oblong, rule of thumb, 1.5 oblong, 1.5 inch strap. And then I'm going to come out 3/4 of an inch or a 1/2 inch, make it your own, but I'm going to come out from either side of that oblong and I'm going to drop in a small hole right on my groove line. So let's lay our pattern on our strap, butt to the end, and let's mark with our awl. Good, okay. Now let's take our 6 tine. I'm going to drop that tine right centered on that mark. Good. Okay, same thing over here and down here. And there we are. When we bend that around, we know those holes are going to match perfectly. Now, if we want to add a keeper, we're going to have to work with it a little bit. I might say maybe 4 chisel holes, then let's leave a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch, and then 2 more holes just to tack that keeper in. That's going to make this a little bit longer, but it's absolutely going to be worth it, and that is going to be a quality belt. I hope there's something in here that's going to help us out in our shop. I love to hand sew, and I hope you feel the same way. Thanks for taking time to watch The Leather Element. Good luck with your projects.